One of the best resources for learning level of detail expressions is still this article from Bethany Lyons back in 2015. This is a collection of 15 common practical use cases where level of detail expressions can help. In the next 3 videos, we will look at these 15 use cases. In this particular video, we will look at the first 5. I will use variations of the examples in order to explain and demonstrate each use case. I will be providing the finished workbooks in my Tableau public profile. The links to the resources can be found in the description down below. I'll see you in a bit. These are the first 5 use cases we will look at. First, we will look at customer order frequency. Second, cohort analysis. Third, a daily profit KPI. Fourth, a percent of total, and comparing this against what you will get with a table calculation. And fifth, new customer acquisition. Remember that level of detail expressions allow us to control the granularity and the level of detail of our expressions or calculated fields. We often use this when our visual has a different level of detail or granularity than the one that we want to achieve with these calculations. If you need an LOD expressions refresher, please check out another comprehensive tutorial I have on this topic. I will put up a link in the card above and description down below. Let's start with our first use case. In here, we will look at the customer order frequency and we will answer a couple of questions. First, how frequently do our customers buy from us? And second, how many of our 5 times repeat customers bought in 2020? Let's jump to Tableau. Before creating our calculated field, let us take a look at some of our details first. Let's drag over customer ID and let us figure out how often they have bought from us. So I'm going to take order ID, right-click drag onto columns, and then select count distinct. Let's also show the labels. There's a quick way to do that in your toolbar, just show the marked labels. Let's also force some of the labels to show up, even if there might be overlaps with other marks. So under the label property in your marks card, I'm going to select allow labels to overlap with other marks. So what we want to be able to answer is the number of customers that bought a certain range. For example, counting the number of customers that bought 5 times, and we can see that there's a few of them. We might be inclined to think that all we need to do is to count the customers. But in here, what's going to happen is when we click on this drop down and convert this into a measure of count distinct, we are going to lose that level of detail. Essentially, what we want is a breakdown of the frequency as well as the number of customers. And by default, we cannot achieve that with the default behavior that comes with Tableau. So let us create our fixed level of detail expression. Let me just undo this. This worksheet right here, this already tells us the numbers that we want to achieve. We can use this as our cheat sheet when we are creating our fixed level of detail expression. So on the drop down, create calculated field, let us call this number of purchases. And I'm just going to mark this as fixed. And in here, we want fixed. And this is fixed by our customer ID. And the aggregation that we want is our number of orders. So we can simply just drag that over as well if you already have it in your canvas. Okay, and click OK. What we get from this calculated field is a measure. Now I will show you a couple of ways we can use this measure. Let's just clear the sheet. So if we simply wanted this to be a label that goes with our customers, we can technically move this up into our dimensions. We can drag this over to display it, and from here we can count the number of customers that we have in each of these frequencies. So right-click drag customer ID onto rows and then count distinct customer ID. And this is the frequency that we have. Let's display our marked labels again. And in here we can see that there are 12 customers who bought only 1 time. There are 34 customers who have bought twice, and so forth. One thing we can notice though is we are missing some numbers. So we have 13, we also have 17, but this doesn't give us numbers 14 all the way to 16 because there is no information, there is no data associated with those frequencies. So another option that we do have if we want to create a histogram is to leave this calculated field as a measure and create a bin from it. So let's try that out. Let's duplicate our calculated field, right click, duplicate, and we're going to leave this one as a measure. So drag that down again. And from here, we can right click and create a bin from this. So right click bin, and I'm just going to set the bin to every one value. So it's going to give me numbers from 1 to 17 and click on OK. So let's duplicate this worksheet because I want to be able to compare them. Duplicate. So in here, instead of our original dimension, we are going to replace this with our bin field. So the one that we just created from our measure. So take this and then drag this over on top of what we already have in our columns to replace it. I'm just going to put these two charts in a dashboard so we can see them side by side. So let's create a dashboard, and we're going to drag over the first one. We're also going to drag over the copy right underneath it. I'm just going to adjust the height. And from here, we can see the big difference. With our field that is a dimension, we are missing those numbers. However, with the field where we are using the bin, we have numbers 14, 15, 16, and then 17. We are not missing those values. It is possible to achieve something similar using our original dimension field. What we can do is simply convert this field into continuous, and that will give us an axis, therefore completing any of the missing values. So on the drop down, continuous. In this case, we simply just need to make adjustments to the mark type and the spacing of the marks. Instead of automatic, let's click on the drop down, let's select a bar, and from here, adjust the size, perhaps make some adjustments to the width. And from a formatting perspective, perhaps simply taking away the grid line. So under Format, Lines, selecting grid lines to none. And this one has a similar effect. The alignment of the labels, though, are a little bit different, but it is still workable. For our second question, how many of our 5 times repeat customers bought in 2020? So essentially what we are asking is how many of these 134 customers, how many of them bought in 2020? So in this case, we can use either of these fields to answer this question. So let's drag over our dimension, and we are also going to display the years of the order date. So drag over order date across the column. So this creates as a matrix, and then let us count the number of customers for each of these intersections. So right click, drag customer ID onto our view. And then here we want to choose count distinct, click on OK. And I'm also going to add the total so we can just double check our numbers. So on the Analytics tab, I'm going to double click on totals. So what we are looking at is our 5 times repeat customers, which is right here. So how many of them bought in 2020? And the answer is 104. What we can also see is the total is correct. There are 134 customers who bought 5 times overall in their lifetime. The other thing that I just wanted to point out in this particular example is notice that because we are using a count distinct, these numbers are not additive. You have 500, these are not adding up to 793. And what this means is some customers actually keep on coming back. So these numbers are not additive, and that's totally fine. This is the correct number. The next use case is about cohort analysis. Let's start by understanding the term cohort. And what it means is simply a group of people. A quick search of cohort analysis in our preferred search engine will give us a number of results. This definition from AppQues covers good ground of cohort analysis. The key components here are first, it is a type of behavioral analytics, and we use it to track behavior of groups of people because we want to understand their actions. One of the main reasons we do this in business is because we want to reduce churn. Churn is a term we use when customers stop doing business with us. For example, customers that don't come back for additional goods and services, or customers that terminate their subscriptions. We want to understand why they're unhappy and improve what we can from our business operations so that we can reduce churn. And the reverse of churn is what we call retention. We want to retain our customers. So let's answer some of these cohort-related questions using Tableau. First question, how many customers do we have per cohort? And second, how many customers in our 2018 cohort bought in 2020? So for this use case, we want to group our customers based on the first year that they bought from us. So let's bring out the details first so that we can understand what we're working with. Let's take our customer ID and let us display each of the dates that they bought from us. So right-click, drag order date. In here, we're going to choose discrete date because we want to list out each individual date. So in here, what we can do is we can take a look at just the first order date and then strip out the year. And that should be the cohort that that customer belongs to. Technically, we can click on order date and convert this into a measure because we can select minimum from here. And in this case, we only have the very first date of the order. The challenge comes when we want to be able to report per cohort and count the number of customers in each cohort, because that means we don't want customer ID in our view. But look at what happens when we take away customer ID. So when we drag over customer ID, all of a sudden, we have just a single date, and we want multiple dates. There are customers who bought from 2018, customers who bought from 2019, customers who bought from 2020, but all those disappear because the level of detail of our viz is really at the grand total level. It's the minimum overall of all of our records of the order date. So let's undo this. And what will help us will be a level of detail expression because we can override some of these limitations. So once we have this worksheet, we can use this worksheet as our cheat sheet. In our calculation, we need our customer ID, and the aggregation that we need is the minimum of the year of the order date. So let's create our calculated field. So on the drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this cohort. I'm just going to tag it with fixed, and we're going to fix this using our customer ID. So we can simply drag it over if you already have your worksheet enabled, and then colon. Our aggregation will be a little bit different. What we have in our worksheet right now is the minimum of order date, but what we want is the minimum of the year of the order date. So we can simply type that in. So the minimum of the year of the order date. And let's not forget our closing curly braces. Click OK. Now we can move this up to dimension because this is meant to be just a descriptor for each of our customer IDs. And just to verify, when we drag it over, we should be getting the correct years. We should be extracting the correct years. So to answer the question, how many customers do we have per cohort? Well, we can simply lay this out as a matrix. So in this case, let me clear the worksheet. I'm going to drag over our cohort, and let's also display all the years of the purchases or all the years of the orders. So in here, order date. What you're going to notice in this matrix is also this zigzag pattern. And this is very common with our cohort analysis. Because, for example, customers that bought in 2021, of course, they will not have any purchases in the prior years. And that's why it is showing up as blank. Let's populate this matrix. Let's drag over the count of the customer IDs. And let's also show all of our totals. So right-click drag customer ID onto our matrix. Select count distinct. Let's go to the analytics tab and double-click our totals. And this answers our question of how many customers do we have per yearly cohort. Now, to answer our second question, it's actually fairly easy the moment we have this matrix. How many customers in the 2018 cohort bought in 2020? And just by looking at this, this is the cohort 2018, and there are 485 of them that bought in 2020. To make this a little bit easier, we can also add our filters. So on the drop down on our cohort fixed, we can show the filter. So we can narrow down if we only wanted to look at the 2018 cohort. We can also further narrow down if we wanted to filter on the year of the order date. So we can add this to filter. So on the drop down, show the filter. And again, if we're just simply interested in the 2020 year, we can select just 2020. And the answer is still 485. For the third use case, we want to know the proportion of profitable days compared to unprofitable days. Specifically, we want to know the number of days that are profitable and number of days that are unprofitable. This could be through the weeks, through the months, or through the years. So we also want to take a look at the trend. Let's start by looking at some of the details. Let's bring over our individual order dates. So right-click drag onto rows, choosing discrete date. And we simply want to see the total profit for that day. So let's take profit and drag it to text. In here, we can see that some days are profitable, where the profit is positive. We can also see some days that are not profitable, meaning the profit is negative. So we will create a regular calculated field first so that we know what it cannot accomplish. So let's create a calculated field. And this one is going to be profitable. And I'm just going to tag this as a regular calculation. So regular. In here, we can check if the sum of profit is greater than 0, then we can tag it as profitable. Otherwise, it is not profitable. Click OK. And let's see if this is right. So drag this over right beside our order date. And we can see it correctly tags the ones that have a negative profit as not profitable and the ones that have positive as profitable. However, what happens if we simply want to count the number of days that fall between these two categories or these two types? So in here, we can convert order date into the number of days. We can convert this into a measure. So on the drop down, under measure, count distinct. But we can see that it actually did not work. So let me just rearrange the pills. Because right now, the level of detail of our viz is at the overall level. There is nothing that slices our profitable or unprofitable anymore. There's no other discrete dimensions. And overall, everything is profitable. So let me just undo this. Let's go back to where we have our order date. In this example, I am going to create two calculated fields. The first one is a fixed level of detail expression that simply sums up the profit for a particular day. The second one is going to be a tag, and this one is going to be a regular calculated field that checks whether the value is positive or not. Let's create the fixed one first. Drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this profit per day, profit per day. And this is going to be fixed, and it's going to be fixed to the order date. And our aggregation is the sum of profit. Click OK. Now, based on this calculated field, we will tag it as profitable or not profitable. So on the drop down, create calculated field. This is going to be profitable. And this is based on fixed. So we're simply going to check if our profit per day is greater than 0, then this is profitable. Else, not profitable. Let's clear our worksheet. And perhaps right now, we simply want to know overall how many days are profitable, how many days are not profitable. So we can drag this one over, and we can count the number of days. So right-click, drag order date onto our columns, and select count distinct of order date. So we can see in here that we have 247 days overall that are not profitable, and the rest of the days are profitable. Let's just double check this so that we know we are getting the correct result. I'm going to create a brand new sheet that simply has details. Let's bring over our order date, right-click, drag order date. We're going to simply choose discrete. We're also going to display our profit, so drag profit over to where it says ABC. Let's also bring over our fixed LOD calculation, just as a tag. Now what I'd like to do is to bring over the previous worksheet and this new worksheet into a dashboard so that we can kind of just double check whether we have it correct or not. So create a brand new dashboard. Let's drag over our summary as well as our details. Now let's just simply double check what happens when we add a filter action. So click on the top part. In here, we are going to activate the filter action. And when we click on not profitable, we should see only unprofitable dates in our details. And in this case, it looks like it's correct. Let's check profitable. And again, it looks like it's correct. Let's try out one more thing. When we go to not profitable, let us sort this in descending fashion. So right click, descending fashion, and we are going to see that some of the records are actually 0. Now let's take a look at the profitable. In here, we're going to sort it the reverse way. Let's sort this in ascending fashion. And it looks pretty interesting because some of them are also 0. Now you may be thinking, this must be a bug, but the reality is it isn't. It's all about precision. So let us go back to this particular worksheet, and we are going to change the precision that is being shown to maybe 5 decimal places. So under sum of profit, under format, we are going to change the numbers so that it is showing more decimal places. So on the drop down, currency, maybe 5 different decimal places. And let's take a look at our dashboard again. In here, we can see that the 0 before is actually a positive number. It just happened to be rounded. Same thing with the not profitable. So let's try that out. Let's sort it descending. And we can see that majority of these are really in the negative area. The very first one, we probably need more decimal places, but ultimately it is going to be a negative number. So what else can we do with this particular example? Well, let's try out different kinds of charts. So in this case, maybe we can convert this into some kind of a line chart. I'm going to move the profitable field onto color. We're going to move count distinct onto rows, and we are going to bring over a continuous date. Right-click drag order date onto columns, and we are going to choose, for now, the continuous year, the continuous date value of year. Click OK. Now we can see the number of days. If we wanted to drill down, we can definitely drill down. Let's say from year, we want to see this breakdown by quarter. We can do that. If we want to see this breakdown by month, we can also do that. Now let's go back to year. And let's change this into a bar graph. So on the drop down for the marks, we are going to change from automatic to a bar. We can also add on a table calculation if we wanted to know the percent, the proportion of the profitable versus the non-profitable days. So on our count distinct order ID, clicking on the drop down, we can add a quick table calculation of percent of total, and we are going to run the percent of total for each year. So on the drop down, we are going to change the direction and the scope. So it's going to be compute using table down. And from here, we can also add this to the label if we want to. So control drag our pill onto label. So control drag onto label. And let's format this so that it doesn't have any decimal places. So on the drop down, format, and under numbers, under percentage, it's just going to be 0 decimal places. Now let's drill down again. From year, we want to take a look at quarter. Then we can see the breakdown of the profitable and the not profitable. The fourth use case is all about percent of total. Let's just have a refresher of how percent of total works with table calculations. So for example, if we bring over region and we display the sales, so drag sales onto text. Let's go to the Analytics tab and add the totals. So double click on totals, go back to our data tab. And then here we can add the table calculation for our sum of sales. So on the drop down, quick table calculation, percent of total. Now let's add back the original number by double clicking on sales again. And as a final step, let us add a filter for region. So on the drop down, show filter. So what we're seeing in here is our grand total sales is about 2.297 million. And if we take a look at the breakdown of the proportion, we can see a couple that's about 20%. West is the biggest for about 30%, and the least is about 17% for South. But notice what's going to happen in here once we start filtering out some dimension values. If we uncheck West and South, all of a sudden, what happens is the remaining regions now take up the 100%. And this is how table calculations work. But in some cases, or in some instances, we don't want this behavior. Perhaps what we want to do is to keep the original percent of total that it has prior to the filter. Basically taking this value and dividing it against our grand total regardless of what we do in the filter. This is where fixed level of detail expressions will help. So let's clear this worksheet. And let us start by creating 2 fixed level of detail expressions, a grand total and a subtotal by region. So on the drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this grand total, and this is fixed. So curly brace, we have fixed. We don't have any dimensions for the grand total, so we simply have a colon, and our aggregation is sum of sales. Now for cases like this, for grand totals and grand amounts, since we don't have a dimension list, we can do away with the fixed keyword as well as the colon. And this is what we call our table scoped level of detail expressions. So let's take this out and simply click OK. Let's create another calculated field. And this is going to be subtotal by region. And this is going to be fixed by region. And it's going to be sum of sales. And click OK. Now let's create our map. So in our map, we're simply going to display this by state. Perhaps we want a color by region, so drag region to color. And let's change the mark to a map instead of a circle. Now let's add to our canvas 3 calculated fields: sales, grand total, as well as subtotal by region. So we have sales, we have subtotal by region, as well as grand total. Once we have these in place, it is easy for us to do the calculations that we need, because what's left for us to calculate is the sales divided by the grand total and the sales divided by subtotal by region. So let's add those. So on the drop down, create calculated field, we're going to call this percent of grand total. And in here, this is simply our sum of sales divided by our grand total. Once we click OK, let's change the formatting, right click, default properties, number format, and this is a percentage. And let's add it to our view. As well as, so in this case, we can simply duplicate that percent of grand total, right click, duplicate, and edit this calculation. And this is going to be percent of region total. So in this case, we're simply going to change our divisor. So instead of the grand total, this has to be the region total. So drag that over, and let's actually add that to our canvas. So as we hover over, we should be able to see our calculations. Now let's pick California. Let's right click California right now. Let's annotate this, annotate the mark, because we want to display the values. Let's format this a little bit. Now let's just notice what's going to happen to these totals and the percent values if we add filters. For example, if we add a filter for segment, so right click, show the filter, and let's say we only want to leave consumer. So which means we are going to uncheck home office and corporate, but we should notice that these values shouldn't change. Only the sales value should change. So uncheck home office, uncheck corporate, and the values are still maintained. Let's add all the segments back in. As a final note, for the grand total or any of these numbers, it is possible for us to consider the other types of level of detail expressions. In this case, we could consider an exclude. For example, we can create a calculated field. So create calculated field. And in here, we're going to call this grand total. And we're going to use an exclude. So instead of fixed, we're going to have our curly brace. It's going to be an exclude. And if we exclude region, comma, as well as state, and if all we're maintaining is the sum of sales, so drag that over, close the curly brace, this should give us our grand total as well. So drag that over. Let's display that in our tooltip. Let's just remove our annotation first. So let's take a look at California again. So we can see in here, grand total using an exclude and grand total using fixed, they are the same. They are going to start to differ, however, with our dimension filters. So in here, if, for example, we uncheck home office and uncheck corporate, having a filter will affect our exclude number. So let's take a look at the tooltip again. And we can see in here that fixed is not affected by our dimension filters, but exclude is affected. For the fifth use case, we will look at customer acquisition, which is a critical component in many businesses. Customer acquisition means we are acquiring or gaining new customers. This is important as it fuels the sustainability of our business. And if we are not acquiring new customers, we need to find out ways or strategies so we do acquire new customers. For this particular use case, we want to visualize our new customer acquisition trend. In the second use case, we looked at cohort analysis. So let's bring up that calculated field. As a tip, we can also use this funnel right beside the search to be able to filter and show only calculated fields. So in here, let's show all of our calculated fields, and our cohort is right here. So right click, edit. For the previous use case, we wanted to know the first year of purchase, the first year that the customer has ordered from us. For this fifth use case, we don't want the year level. We actually want this at the day level. So let's create another calculated field that gives us the minimum date level. So create new calculated field. Let's call this first order date, first order date, and this is going to be fixed. We are going to fix this by customer ID, fixed customer ID, and this is going to be simply the minimum of the order date. And click OK. To visualize our acquisition trend, we can simply use this new calculated field. So let's right click and drag our first order date. And for now, we can start by using maybe the weekly level. This option will give us a time series chart or a time axis. So select that one, click on OK. And from here, we simply want to know the number of customers that were acquired for that specific week. So we can take our customer ID, right click, drag, put that onto rows and count distinct. Click OK. So this is our trend. And at first glance, it's not looking great because it looks like we have been acquiring consistently in 2018, maybe around 18 to about 20 customers, but it looks like it has dropped down once we start hitting 2019. So what this means from a business perspective is we need to change our strategy, up our strategy. Another variation we can do when we're visualizing this is we can also add on another table calculation that is the running total. So in this case, I'm simply going to duplicate our count distinct of order ID that is currently in our rows. So press Control and drag it over to create a second copy. And for the second copy, we can add a quick table calculation. So in this case, quick table calculation, this is going to be a running total. So this is a different visual, but it gives us a similar story. We are acquiring customers more rapidly right around this point, and then it starts to plateau. So which means we are actually not acquiring as many customers later on in our cycle. We can also start subdividing this and adding additional dimensions so that we have a better understanding if the trend is specifically for one group or if it's across the board. For example, if we wanted to see this by segment, so dragging segment onto color, we can see that the trend is fairly similar across different segments. Let's drag that out. Maybe let's take a look at region. So dragging it per region, going to color. And again, it gives us a similar story. So that's our first 5 use cases. So as a recap, we've talked about customer order frequency, cohort analysis, daily profit KPI, percent of total, and new customer acquisition. In the next video, we are going to tackle the next 5 top 6 to 10 LOD examples. And these are on comparative sales analysis, average of top values, actual versus target, value on the last day of period, and return purchase by cohort. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you again next time.